Say hello to the SGI 230.
Wait a minute, haven't you had this one the other week already?
Nope, you're mixing it up with the SGI 320, which is a totally different machine. The SGI 230, as opposed to the SGI 320, was a pretty much standard PC-compatible Pentium 3 machine offering commodity PC hardware on the inside. But the machine failed me last time. I wanted to perform a clean install for showcasing my freshly slipstreamed Windows 2000 CD. The fix should be straightforward. So let's also have a look at how this machine stacks up and compares to its bigger brethren. Have you ever fixed an old computer? I did, many times. I'm the vintage collector and these are my stories. So with the error message seen before, it's pretty much clear we have a worn down CMOS battery here. The mainboard comes with the VIA Apollo Pro 133A chipset and is a pretty much standard PC mainboard, featuring both onboard Ethernet and audio options. Important to note, however, is that the Apollo Pro 133A chipset was the most successful VIA chipset at the time, closing in and offering on-par performance in comparison to the then still popular Intel 440BX chipset. The CPU is a socket 370 Pentium 3 clocking in at 733 MHz on a 133 MHz front-side bus clock. The mainboard is equipped with 512 MB of PC133 ECC SD RAM. The chipset allows for a maximum of 1.5 GB of RAM to be installed and supports even 1 GHz Pentium 3 CPUs. And thankfully, the mainboard features as well a CR2033 cell holder, so it's very easy to replace the cell. And this concludes my look at the SGI 230.
Wait a minute, you can just do a 60 seconds video. There must be something more to the story.
Okay, now you got me. I thought I can do a short video to spare the time while I'm on business leave. Alright, it shall be a full-blown video then. So while I have the case opened up anyway, I'm gonna do some rewiring and tidying for the cabling. During my later stages and progressing with the topic, I then also removed this creative CT4750 PCI audio card, which didn't make sense to keep as there is already onboard audio available. I even found a matching slot bezel that looks very similar to the original ones of this machine. What I didn't have yet though was a spare front bezel so I could remove the white DVD drive. The CD-ROM drive at the center slot seems to be the original one, whereas the other front bezel below it has a different hue and was probably retrofitted by the pre-owner. So if I'd removed this wrong DVD drive, the only other thing which is not fully system correct is the hard drive. Still, it is an IDE drive, though one with some 200 GB in capacity, whereas this system originally came with a 20 or 30 GB hard drive. This leaves me then with just an X component, which luckily still is an original part, the Nvidia Quadro AGP graphics card sporting 64 MB of RAM. This graphics card was based on the GeForce 256, but was furtherly optimized for graphical applications. The case reveals itself with a production date from May 2000 and features this mounting cage here that could accommodate the standard PC speaker. Though that was not necessary, as the mainboard already has a piezo speaker equipped. So all in all, when considering the images from the SGI 230's owner's guide, this system seems to be in a more or less original configuration, which originally sold with a starting price of $2,775. But then, in June 2000, the prices were already cut down to $2,420 for the entry-level configuration, though I have no idea what the original entry-level configuration really was. I found a spec sheet from 2001, so an entire year after the initial release, mentioning various options, whereas the 800 MHz Pentium 3 CPU was the slowest available CPU, coming in with a 20 GB hard drive. a CD-ROM drive, and probably a 128MB RAM configuration and a Matrox Millennium GPU. So, this is guessworking, but then for the same entry model 1 year before, I'd believe the 733MHz CPU was a comparable configuration. And I totally can't tell if the initial price of $2,775 included the keyboard, the mouse, or even the monitor. And with the CMOS battery being replaced, I'm off to reconfiguring the BIOS. And I will have to deal with the BIOS because it yells at me about a missing keyboard, so I'm not using a PS2 but a USB keyboard here. So I have to temporarily hook up a PS2 keyboard in order to perform the BIOS configuration, by necessity enabling legacy keyboard support in there. This is one of the biggest differences between the 230, 330 and 540 systems versus the 320 and 520 machines, whereas the former are standard PCs and the latter feature custom mainboards and the ARC firmware instead of the PC BIOS. So I then begin with installing Windows 2000 off the Slipstream CD I created in my last video. Now, a word about Windows 2000. As noted before, the case exposed the production date of May 2000, which is technically speaking 3 months after the release of Windows 2000. However, according to my research, the SGI 230 was released in the year 2000 and came originally with Windows NT 4. Now, the 733MHz Pentium 3 CPU was released in October 1999, so our timeline still stacks up, and it's well possible that these 230s still shipped with NT 4 even after the general availability of Windows 2000. I have found several revisions of the technical release notes, the most recent one from 2001 still mentioning Windows NT 4 as a default pre-install. Well, maybe I should take it then and also install Windows NT 4 for a full period correct setting. After all, Windows 2000 seems to install just fine from my Slipstream CD, leaving me with the legacy update installer on the hard drive as expected. And then again, going via the legacyupdate.net, I experienced the same as before on previous installs, that it all works just like a charm, bringing my Win 2000 system to the last known good state. Now, as said before, the mainboard was pretty much standard. Still, the configuration was pretty decent. Maybe not high-end, but well comparable to my retrofitted SGI 320 gaming rig. Albeit this was certainly never the intention of Silicon Graphics, having professional use in mind for this machine. This is also the reason the Nvidia Quadro was equipped with this machine, which, according to my research, provided better graphics capabilities for CAD and other uses. While mostly identical to the contemporary GeForce 256, the Quadro has additional hardware support for high-end graphics design and also received a certification from certain suppliers to go along with their graphics products. Still, if it is a GeForce 256 at its heart, the interesting question is, how good would it stack up if I'd compare the two systems? So I'd run some generic benchmarks. It allows me to pick similar systems and configurations for comparison. And yes, by pure numbers, it should be a bit better than my Intel 440BX based setup with the Pentium 3 550. Though I'm not so much sure about the graphics card, as I sport the later generation's GeForce 2 Ti in the reworked SGI 320. So how to compare and benchmark? Well, I'll be using Quake 3 Arena's time demo, like in the good old times. So on the 230 I get out with 64.6 frames per second with the best possible graphics settings on a 1024 by 768 display resolution. Given for the time then, this would have definitely been a beast. But what about the retrofitted SGI 320? Remember, I had there a dual boot system with both Windows 98 and Windows 2000. Back then, gamers always preferred Windows 98 as it was said to be better performing, albeit less stable than Windows 2000. But how much of a difference was it really? Here, on Windows 98, I get a raw 51.3 frames per second, and Windows 2000 gave me 50.3 frames per second. Well, that's not so much a difference, probably owed to Quake 3 being very well optimized. Plus, of course, I ran the most recent graphic drivers on both operating systems, so it's quite safe to assume that the latest drivers had received as well as many optimizations to make the two comparable. Of course, this statement may not be fully true for all games out there, but at least for Quake 3 Arena I see now no real difference. It's just like that the SGI 230 with its via Polo powered mainboard, the 733 MHz Pentium 3 and the Nvidia Quadro, albeit a less advanced graphics card than the later GeForce 2 Ti, brings an overall improvement of plus 12 frames per second. Now, Quake 3 Arena was known to strongly benefit from a faster frontside bus, and the SGI 230 featuring, except for the graphics card, more recent gear, would actually have made as well as good a gaming rig for my contemporary needs. If I were really up to the ultimate comparison of the two, I'd rerun the benchmarks again in 640x480 graphics mode to see top out performance numbers of each one. So let's do it quickly as well. So here's again the 320, giving me 51 frames per second on Windows 2000. And it's about the same on Windows 98. The SGI 230 on the other hand peaked out at 74.5 frames per second, so again a plus of 10 frames per second just by running it in 640x480 mode. So there must be something else being the bottleneck on the SGI 320. I then went to do some overclocking, first raising the frontside bus to 105 MHz, which as a result overclocked the CPU to 577 MHz. This raised the FPS in Windows 98 just a bit up to 53.7 frames per second. Next I then raised the frontside bus to 110 MHz, resulting the Pentium 3 being now overclocked to 600 MHz. And now the same time demo on Windows 98 yields 56.1 frames per second. So, the general statement about the FSB clock taking influence on transfer rate seems to be correct. And if I had the cooling equipment available, I could actually try to max out my P3BF and the 550 MHz Pentium 3 CPU towards a higher FSB and probably reach the other system's baseline. But then again, what for? Now that I have the perfect situation that I have two systems with comparable specs, why should I toast one just to prove that I could probably reach the other's performance specs? But now, with all these benchmarks behind me, I'll be cleaning the mouse and the keyboard. As usual, I'm disassembling the keyboard caps to have them thoroughly cleaned. Also, I'm cleaning the outside of the plastic shell and the cables before putting everything back together. And this concludes my look at the SGI 230 as opposed to the SGI 320, which unfortunately is no longer an original SGI on the inside. This one here still is. If we are ignoring the non-original DVD drive and this front bezel here for now, though I will look out to find at least another black bezel so I can yank out the DVD drive. But I'm grateful this is still more or less in original condition, and maybe I can even find an original SGI 230 bezel. Who knows? If it were not for the SGI branding, this machine would probably be forgotten over time. The x86 based SGI systems were widely received as an attempt to compete against the ever-rising and growing PC market, rendering specialized high-end graphics workstations more and more obsolete in the end. SGI's x86 market entrance was a failure, but ultimately shook up customers' trust into the MIPS line of workstations as well, leading to the ultimate downfall. Needless to say, SGI ultimately went into bankruptcy in 2009. Still, their machines survive to this day, with a few being in my collection for more upcoming stories to tell. I'm the Vintage Collector, and this was my story. Thanks for watching, and see you next time. If you check out this channel's community tab, you'll find some polls on potential upcoming videos. You're very welcome to upvote on upcoming topics or drop in new ones you'd like me to chase down.